There's nothing more profound than hope. There's nothing more fundamental than the belief that tomorrow and the days ahead will be better than yesterday and the day before. Hope for me, as a child that grew up in a refugee camp along the Thailand and Cambodia border, came in the form of cans of tuna, rations of rice, and jugs of clean drinking water provided by the United Nations. Our refugee camp was home to thousands of people, Cambodians, who survived the genocidal regime of Pol Pot. On a daily basis, I would see people looking up into the sky, not for hope or inspiration, but just to make sure that there were no bombs falling to the ground. When you live with that type of fear in your life is when you've realized that you've died 1,000 times over. On many mornings, I'd wake up to a group of white men and women who were speaking a language that I could not understand. And in the midst of that group was a man with a camera. I did not understand what his purpose was or what his reason to be there. But I stood there watching him every day as he pointed his lens in every direction. And I watched him for hours. And I said to myself that maybe in my next lifetime, I could be just like him. On September 25th of 1985, my family and I immigrated to Canada, and we settled here in Windsor, Ontario. One evening, as we were watching television, and as my father stumbled with his fingers to turn the knob on the TV to find a channel that was clear enough to watch, we saw an image that we recognized. That image was our camp. And even though the pictures were fuzzy and the sound was crackling, it was an image that I could not forget. The movie that was playing on television that night was The Killing Fields, and it was shot right in front of our tent. That evening, I figured out the purpose of the man with the camera. Going to school was a dream come true for me. I had never been to school before. The hardest subjects for me were not math or science or even English, even though I couldn't speak a single word, but it was phys ed. You see, in order to participate in phys ed, you had to wear shorts. And in September, it was cold. So my parents would always dress me in long pants and long shirts. They'd also just introduced me to the underwear. I had never worn underwear either until then, and I couldn't understand the purpose why anybody would put on a layer of clothing only to put on something else directly on top. So one morning, tired of sitting on the sidelines as other kids played in gym class, I looked at my pants, and I was wearing underwear. So I thought to myself, I think I've had shorts on all this time. So I went into the change room. I took off my pants, and I ran into the gymnasium in my tighty whities. The girls screamed. The boys all laughed and pointed, and the teacher stood there shaking his head, while I stood there with my arms wide open, waiting for somebody to please pass me the ball. That same afternoon, I was pulled out of class, and I thought for sure it was about my underwear, but it wasn't. My neighbors from across the street picked me up from school. And on our way home, as we pulled onto the road where we lived on, I saw an ambulance racing past us. And as we got closer to my home, I saw fire trucks and police cars all around. I stood there watching our house burnt to the ground. My brother was severely burnt, and everything my parents had worked for to that day was gone, and we were homeless again. And as I stood across the street and watched the smoke subside, and the men and women in uniform finally left, I saw a man with a camera standing there, pointing in every direction, capturing our story. I watched the news that night to make sure that the story aired, and the next morning, a group of random strangers from our community came to our aid, donating furniture, food, clothing, and even shorts. I'd never felt so loved before in my entire life. And that day, I made a vow to myself to become that man with the camera, because I wanted to do what he did for others, and I wanted others to feel how I felt on that day when I saw his images and the kind of help that we got. I wanted to be that man, and I was going to be that man at all costs. From Afghanistan to Haiti, Iraq, and Indonesia, and 80 points in countries in between, I spent the last 15 years of my life telling stories. From war zones to natural disasters, to places on this earth where nobody wanted to go, I've met thousands of people who allowed a clumsy man with a camera enter their lives to tell their stories. Sometimes, when I cannot sleep at night, I think of them. What happened to the abandoned boy with the broken leg in the Baghdad hospital? Did your mother ever come back to pick you up? And to the little girl in Port-au-Prince who was starving and was chasing after me all day, not for my granola bars, but for the pen that I was writing with. Sweetheart, did you ever write that letter you said you'd write? And to the little boy in Kandahar who begged me to try on my bulletproof vest, and I did not take it off to let you try. I'm sorry, but there was so much gunfire that day, and I was scared, and yet you were so brave. Did you ever make it out alive? If I could revisit the thousands of people I've met through the years that I've filmed, intruding into their lives at the worst possible time, I would apologize. I would also tell them at the same time that because they've allowed me to enter their lives and tell their stories, they help to shape the world and make it a little better. Because only through understanding of the human experience do we understand ourselves. Stories define us, shape us, and direct us to where we want to go. I'm often asked, how do you tell a great story of the human experience? The answers lie not within the story, the people, or the place you are, but within yourself as the storyteller. In order to understand the world around you, you must first understand yourself. And forget about the kind of camera you will use or the lenses you will buy, because that is all irrelevant if you do not understand your purpose, your voice, and your message. Learn to live the self-examined life, the process of taking a step back to view who you really are, to critique yourself, to look at yourself in the mirror and to doubt yourself, to let yourself know what your fears are, and to say at the end that this is me and it's okay. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to not know where you want to be 5 years from now. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to be you. It's okay. And only then will you become a better storyteller. Because at this point, you've come to understand that the world is not perfect, and neither are you. After all, the story of the human experience evolves around resiliency, perseverance, and the notion that no matter what cards we are dealt with in life, you shall never give up. I am reminded of this resilience during an assignment in Haiti shortly after the earthquake. Early one morning, I decided to break away from my media team and venture out on my own. And as I walked through the corridors of the refugee camp in Port-au-Prince, I turned around a corner and I noticed a young boy sitting in a little red chair all by himself. I picked up my camera and put it to my face, and as I looked through the viewfinder, I thought to myself that this was the perfect image. As I took the first 2 or 3 photos, he heard the shutter of my camera and turned to look directly down the barrel of my lens. And as we made eye contact through my camera, at this point, I lost my breath. Because all I could see were the flies hovering around his face, entering his ears, his nose, his eyes, and into his mouth. And as I looked through the viewfinder, in the synapse of a moment, his lips parted, and he gave me the world's biggest smile I had ever seen, as flies hovered into his mouth. I could not take this photo. I put the camera down, I waved at him, and I smiled, and I turned around and I walked away. And even though I did not take this photo, that image of him was burnt in my retina and my mind, and it took me a very long time to not see it when I went to bed. It is only recently that I've come to the understanding that maybe it was this little boy's way of telling this man with a camera that everything was going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. So to everyone here tonight and watching online, please never ever forget that there are many who struggle in this world every day beyond what we go through on a daily basis. So let's share our stories. Let's inspire each other, and let's change the world. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.